I'd like us to go back in time to 1983. Now, some of you here might not be able to do that as well, as I say some people here are not probably old enough to remember that, but many of us here can. And I'd like to put in the context of the run-up to the year 1984. And in this country, there were a lot of discussions and taking stock in American society as to what were the lessons that George Orwell was talking about in that book, and where was America vis-a-vis the predictions in 1984. If any of you were asked in 1983 about the following situation, tell me if you think you would have agreed that it was an accurate prediction of American society or the West. That it would be common practice that anywhere you walked in a metropolitan area would be under constant video surveillance. That any economic transaction you made or phone call would be recorded forever. That if the government believed that you were radical, that you could receive a phone call or a knock at your door from the police telling you that you are under a control order and that you were forbidden from leaving the jurisdiction, that you have to call the police 1, 2, 3 times a day, and that you were not permitted to have more than a certain amount of money on your person at any time. That if you were arrested for an actual crime beyond the thought crime I just described, that you would be imprisoned without bail, in solitary confinement, in perpetuity until the time of your trial. If you were told that scenario in 1983, in all honesty, how many of us would have said, yes, that's where America is and should be? Well, sisters and brothers, 1984 is here. In London, England, the first half of what I just described is in full effect. Everywhere you walk is under surveillance. People right now are walking around under control orders, not because they committed a crime, but because the state thinks that they are radical, and that therefore they have to be monitored. And without any due process, without a lawyer, without input from that person, they are automatically placed under the control order, and they have no recourse to challenge that. In this country now, if you are charged with a crime of terrorism such as Fahad, you are not presumed innocent. You are locked up and detained. And I will talk about Fahad's detention. That is where we are. And I'm going to talk about Fahad's case, but it cannot be taken from that context. While we sit here in this magnificent room, beautiful dome, a lovely campus, birds chirping, springs around the corner finally, Fahad Hashmi is sitting in solitary confinement in the special housing unit of the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He is not permitted to see anyone except for myself and his other attorney, my law partner, Fahad, who is also here today, sitting inconspicuously in the background, but he is working on this case just as much, if not more than I am. Fahad can speak to us. He can speak to 3 immediate family members who have been pre-cleared by the FBI. Once every 2 weeks for a total amount of 1.5 hours. Not individually 1.5 hours, but the total amount of time is 1.5 hours. So by the time the family member has cleared the various gates, locked doors, computer screens they must in order to finally get to 10 South where he is housed, there is not enough time for the second family member ever to see him in that short amount of time. Fahad can't write letters to anyone except for those family members, those immediate 3 family members. 3 single-sided pages per week total. He can write myself and Karam. And he can write to any United States congressman that he would like. That's permitted, but no one else. He cannot write to Amnesty International. International. He cannot write to Human Rights Watch. He cannot write to the Red Cross. He cannot write to the Red Crescent. He is barred. If Fahad tries to talk through the door of his cell, there are measures in place that authorize an electronic monitoring device be in his cell and outside the door of his cell. So if he is captured by this recording or the live feed trying to talk to anyone, he's subject to even more discipline, if you can imagine there's any more room left for discipline. No media. All media. TVs, radios are banned. Any newspaper that has current events, such as the New York Times, is banned. It's on a 30-day delayed minimum, but then there's discretion to ban it completely. This is what Fahad is living under right now. 24 hours a day. When he gets the 1 hour of recreational time he's supposedly entitled to, it's in a cage in that area. It's not outside. There's no fresh air. There's no sunlight on his skin. It's a cage. I imagine not unlike the cages we've seen in other places in this world. How did this situation and Fahad's situation come to pass? Fahad grew up in Flushing, Queens. His family came to the United States in the early 1980s. Fahad is now 28 years old. He attended elementary schools in Flushing. He graduated from Wagner High School. And he went to college. He went to Stony Brook, and then he transferred and graduated from Brooklyn College. That wasn't enough education. Fahad, in 2003, was admitted and enrolled and moved to London Metropolitan University, where he was pursuing his master's degree in international studies. While in London in 2004, in February 2004, an acquaintance called Fahad, contacted Fahad and said, "Look, I'm going to be in the country. I have nowhere to live. I have nowhere to stay. I have no roof. Can you please put me up?" And Fahad, who, as you heard some snippets from Abu Yusuf, Fahad is one of the most open-hearted, generous individuals I think any of us would ever encounter. And so Fahad, without hesitation, opened up his home and his flat to this person. The person stayed roughly 2 weeks and left. 2 years later, in about 2 months, around May of 2006, Fahad was in Heathrow Airport going to Pakistan, a place where a number of his extended family lived. As he was in the airport, he was grabbed, arrested, humiliated, roughed up by British police, and eventually, after, as you can imagine, a most terrifying ordeal, he was eventually informed that he was not being charged for any British law breaking, but that he was being charged for crimes in the United States, specifically for being a terrorist. Fahad, on advice of attorneys, fought extradition. What sane Muslim young man in another country would agree voluntarily to come back to the United States, the land of Abu Ghraib, the land of Guantanamo, the land of all the men from Lodi to Lackawanna to everywhere else who have been thrown into prisons indefinitely? So Fahad exerted his legal rights that any American, such as Scooter Libby or Karl Rove, would also exert. And he fought it for a year, but eventually the British courts, since about 2003, since creating a more lenient, streamlined extradition system with the United States, sent Fahad back to this